I still remember the first time they called me gifted, not as praise, but as diagnosis. They came for me on the morning of my 6th birthday. Imperial agents, their faces hidden behind red hoods, carrying instruments that hummed with a sound that made my ears bleed. My mother would not look at me as they bound my hands with cold iron shackles. She kept her eyes fixed on the floor, as if what stood before her was not her son, but something unclean, something to be feared, something that had only been pretending to be human all along. I was not the only one they took that day. 12 children from my hab block, all bearing what the Imperium calls the witch mark, the cursed ones, the dangerous ones, the useful ones. They marched us through streets choked with incense and hymns. The crowds parted like water before a blade. No one dared to look directly at us, but I could feel their hatred, their fear, their relief that it was not their child being taken away. We boarded a black ship, its hull adorned with symbols that hurt my eyes to look upon. It smelled of antiseptic and burning hair. "You belong to the Emperor now," said the woman who processed us, her voice flat and cold as the void between stars. "Your previous life is over. Your name is no longer yours to claim. You are Psyker Designate MX-379. Her augmetic eyes whirred as they focused on my face. Preliminary tests indicate Delta-level potential. Strong enough to be useful, not strong enough to warrant immediate execution. I did not understand then what she meant. I would learn. Oh, how I would learn. The journey was endless, a nightmare of darkness and whispers. The null iron chains grew heavier with each passing day, biting into my wrists until they bled. But without them, the voices would come. Voices that spoke in languages no human throat could produce. Voices that promised power, freedom, pleasure beyond mortal comprehension. Voices that lied. When we finally arrived at the Scholastia Psychana on Terra, I had already forgotten what the sun looked like. The sanctioned psyker who met us at the disembarkation chamber had no eyes, only smooth skin where they should have been. Yet I could feel him looking at each of us, measuring the weight of our souls, judging which would break first. "Most of you will not survive the first year," he said without preamble. "Those who do will wish they had not. But know this, your suffering serves the Emperor, your pain shields humanity. Your sacrifice will never be remembered, but without it, mankind would perish in fire and madness." I remember thinking it sounded like a poor bargain. 15 years later, I know it to be the only bargain their island. The Scholastia Psychana was not a school as I had understood the term. It was a prison, a laboratory, a slaughterhouse, and a temple. Its corridors were carved from black stone that absorbed light and sound. Its chambers echoed with screams and prayers, often indistinguishable from one another. Every surface was etched with wards that burned the skin of those with the gift to see them. My first night, they placed me in a cell barely large enough to lie down. The walls were lined with psi-reactive copper that reflected my thoughts back at me, amplified and distorted. I could hear the weeping of the other children, each isolated in their own metal coffin. 3 of them died before morning, their minds shattered by the psychic backlash of their own fear. The overseers called it necessary attrition. We began each day with the prayer of containment, 300 verses recited on our knees with our foreheads pressed against cold stone. I am the vessel, not the content. I am the channel, not the power. I am the servant, never the master. Over and over until our voices gave out and the words lost all meaning, becoming merely sounds that vibrated in our bones. Breakfast was a flavorless nutrient paste, laced with drugs that suppressed our appetites and dulled our emotions. A blessing, really, considering what followed. The morning sessions were devoted to control exercises. We would sit in circles, null iron collars chaining us to the floor, while instructors placed objects before us. Simple things. A feather, a cup of water, a candle. "Move the feather," they would command. "But do not burn it, do not freeze it, do not alter its nature in any way." It sounds so simple. It was not. The mind is not meant to touch the world directly. There are barriers, walls built by evolution and divine design to keep reality safe from thought. When a psyker reaches out, those walls crack. And through those cracks, things peer back. Hungry things, patient things. My first attempt to move the feather resulted in it bursting into green flames that spread across the floor in patterns that formed screaming faces. 2 instructors died containing the fire. I spent the next week in solitary confinement with a null collar set to its highest setting, feeling as if my skull was being crushed in a vice. A poor performance, the eyeless instructor said when I was finally released. But instructive for the others. Try again. And so it went, day after day, attempt after attempt. Each failure punished with increasing severity, each success rewarded with nothing more than a harder task the next day. By the end of the first year, only 4 of us remained from the original 12. I had learned to move the feather. I had learned to light the candle. I had learned to freeze the water without shattering the cup. I had also learned what happens when control slips. Arek was the first of us to manifest telepathic abilities. He could touch the surface thoughts of others, a valuable skill that marked him for special training. I envied him until the morning I woke to find him standing over my bed, blood streaming from his eyes and ears. "They never stop talking," he whispered. "So many voices, everyone, everything, even the stones are screaming." His mind had opened too far, too fast. He had heard not just the thoughts of our instructors, but of every living being in the facility. Thousands of minds crashing into his at once, without filter or protection. They did not execute him immediately. That would have been merciful. Instead, they took him to the demonstration chamber, where senior students were gathered to witness the consequences of insufficient discipline. They removed his null collar and restraints. Then they simply waited. It took less than a minute. His eyes rolled back. His body contorted. His skin began to ripple as if something beneath it was trying to get out. Then he spoke, but the voice was not his own. Such delicious despair, such exquisite pain. A feast laid out just for me. What followed cannot be described in terms that would not invite the very horrors I witnessed. I will say only this: when it was over, when the sanctioned psychers and the Sister of Silence had done their work, there was nothing left of Arek but a smear on the floor and a psychic echo that lingered for days, causing nightmares throughout the facility. "This is failure," the eyeless instructor said, his voice perfectly level. "Return to your training." So we did. The second year brought new lessons. No longer were we simply learning to control our abilities. Now we were learning to use them, to focus psychic energy into destructive forms, to peer through the veil between worlds, but never to reach through it, to touch minds, not just to read them, but to break them. These lessons were taught by members of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica, veterans of 1,000 battles whose bodies and minds bore the scars of their service. Many were blind, their eyes burned out by the power they channeled. Others were missing limbs, not lost to enemy fire, but amputated after warp corruption began to spread through their flesh. All of them were hard, hollow men and women who spoke of their gift as one might speak of a terminal disease, with a mixture of resignation and bitter pride. "You will suffer," said Instructor Kane, a rail-thin man with silver studs implanted along his jawline. "You will die, probably in pain, probably in fear. But before that happens, you will serve. You will be the eyes of the fleet, the voice that carries orders across the void, the fire that burns the heretic and the mutant. You will be the weapon of weapons." He taught us biomancy, the art of manipulating living tissue. Under his guidance, we learned to accelerate healing, to stop blood flow, to cause heart muscles to seize. We practiced on servitors first, then on condemned prisoners. The first time I stopped a human heart, I vomited for hours afterward. By the 20th time, I felt nothing at all. Instructor Vale handled our training in pyrokinesis. She had no lower jaw, just a mechanical apparatus that clicked and whirred when she spoke. Fire, she explained, was the purest expression of the Psyker's art. Direct, undeniable, cleansing. "The flames you summon are not metaphorical," she said. but neither are they entirely natural. They burn with your will, your faith, your hatred. They are an extension of your soul. Use them carelessly, and it is your soul that will be consumed. We learn to create fire from nothing, to shape it, direct it, control its hunger. We practiced in chambers lined with fireproof ceramite, wearing flame-retardant robes that still left us covered in burns at the end of each session. But the most difficult lessons, the ones that claimed the most lives, were those in divination and telepathy. To open one's mind to the future or to other minds is to create a conduit through which malevolence can flow both ways. Instructor Heimlen, a blind woman with a face so scarred it barely seemed human, taught us to shield our thoughts, to create mental barriers that would keep our minds our own. The voices will never stop, she told us, not until you die. They will whisper to you in your dreams. They will scream at you in moments of weakness. They will offer you everything you have ever wanted. Power, knowledge, freedom from pain. They will sound reasonable. They will sound kind. She leaned forward, her ruined face inches from mine. They are lying. Always. Forever. There is no bargain you can make with the warp that will not destroy you and everything you touch. Remember that when the voices speak sweetest. I did remember. I do remember. Even now, as I write these words with shaking hands, I can hear them, patient, persistent, promising relief from the crushing weight of existence. I do not listen. I recite the litanies. I tighten my null collar until my vision dims. I carve the wards of aversion into my palms with the edge of my stylus, letting the pain ground me in reality. It is never enough. But it must be. The third year brought specialization. Those who showed particular aptitude for certain disciplines were separated for focused training. I was assigned to the augurs, those whose gift allowed them to pierce the veil of time and space, to see what was hidden, to know what was coming. It should have been an honor. It felt like a death sentence. Divination is perhaps the most dangerous of the sanctioned psyker arts. To see truly, one must open the mind's eye completely, and what that eye sees cannot be unseen. The currents of fate, the tangled threads of possibility, the lurking horrors that wait in potential futures. All of it floods into the unprotected mind, carving channels that never fully heal. Our instructor was a woman named Sybil, ancient beyond reckoning, her body so withered that she was carried into our training chamber on a palanquin operated by servitors. Her skin was translucent, blue veins visible beneath like rivers on a map. Her eyes were white orbs that never blinked. "You think you know fear," she said, her voice surprisingly strong. "You have not yet begun to understand it. To see the future is to see the end of all things. To know with certainty that all endeavor is ultimately futile, that entropy claims everything, that the stars themselves will one day go out." She smiled, revealing teeth filed to points. "And yet we look, because to be blind is worse. To stumble forward in ignorance is to invite disaster not just for ourselves, but for all humanity." Our training began with simple exercises, reading sealed messages, locating hidden objects, describing rooms we had never entered. With each success, the tasks grew harder, predicting the outcome of random events, identifying infiltrators among loyal subjects, seeing through the eyes of animals, then servitors, then willing humans. The strain was immense. 2 of my fellow augurs suffered brain hemorrhages during particularly difficult viewings. Another clawed her own eyes out after seeing something she refused to describe. 4 more were executed after showing signs of warp taint, their bodies burned and their ashes scattered in the void. I survived by being cautious, by never opening my mind's eye too wide, by looking at reflections rather than directly at the things I sought to see. It made me less effective than some of the others, but it also kept me sane. Mostly, there were still nightmares, visions that came unbidden in the dark hours. I saw hive cities burning under skies torn open to reveal churning madness. I saw fleets of living ships devouring worlds. I saw humanity's extinction played out in 1,000 variations, each more horrific than the last. These are not necessarily prophecies, Sybil told me when I finally confessed these visions. They are possibilities, fragments of potential futures, or perhaps simply manifestations of your own fears, given form by your gift. She did not sound convinced of her own words. Record them, she instructed. All of them, in detail. They will be analyzed for patterns, for insights that might be hidden even from you. I did as she commanded, filling data slates with descriptions of horrors that left me sleepless for days afterward. Slates were taken away by grim-faced adepts who never spoke to me, never met my eyes. I do not know what became of those records. Perhaps they were filed away in some vast Imperial archive. Perhaps they were compared to the nightmares of 1,000 other psychers seeking concordance that might indicate true prophecy. Or perhaps they were simply destroyed, deemed too disturbing or too hopeless to be of use. What I do know is that after 6 months of this, I was deemed ready for the next phase of my training. Combat application. The transition was abrupt. One morning I was in the divination chambers, peering through time and space. The next, I was standing in a massive hangar aboard a warship, surrounded by men and women in the uniform of the Imperial Guard, all of them keeping a careful distance from me and the other psychers who had been assembled. Our new instructor was not a psyker but a commissar, a political officer whose duty was to maintain morale and discipline, by bullet if necessary. His name was Tannhauser, and he regarded us with the same expression one might give to a weapon of dubious reliability. "You are no longer students," he said, pacing before us with his hands clasped behind his back. "You are assets, Imperial resources to be deployed where needed. Your training will now focus on battlefield application of your abilities, coordination with military units, and survival in combat conditions." He stopped, his cold eyes scanning our faces. "Some of you may be thinking that completion of your training means greater freedom. This is not the case. You will be watched more closely than ever. The battlefield is chaotic, stressful, unpredictable, all conditions that increase the risk of warp contamination. The first sign of corruption will result in immediate execution, for your own good and for the safety of those around you." He drew his bolt pistol and held it up for us to see. "I personally will be carrying sanctified ammunition at all times. Round for each of you. Consider it my sacred duty and my solemn promise." The message was clear. We were not soldiers. We were not even people. We were weapons, to be aimed and fired and discarded when spent. Combat training was unlike anything that had come before. The focus was not on refining our abilities, but on teaching us to use them under pressure, in coordination with conventional forces and within strict operational parameters. We ran drills in simulated urban environments, using our powers to flush out hidden enemies for guard units to engage. We practiced battlefield divination, seeking to predict enemy movements and ambush points. We learned to create psychic barriers to protect advancing troops, to disrupt enemy communications, to sow confusion and terror in opposing forces. And we learned to kill, not the clinical, controlled termination of prisoners that had been part of our earlier training. This was mass slaughter, unleashing psychic energies capable of liquefying dozens of enemies at once, of igniting the air in their lungs, of causing blood vessels to explode throughout their bodies. The targets were servitors at first, then captured heretics and mutants deemed too dangerous or too corrupted for redemption. They died screaming, their bodies twisted by the psychic forces we channeled. The smell was indescribable, the sound worse. I vomited after the first such exercise. The commissar merely watched, his face impassive. "Get used to it," he said. "This is your purpose now. 4 more weeks of training, then deployment." I was assigned to the 117th Cadian Regiment, a storied unit currently engaged in the suppression of a heretical uprising on the mining world of Calibrax. My designation was now Sanctioned Psyker Theta 117, attached to Bravo Company under the command of Captain Lorick. The captain was a veteran of 3 campaigns, his face a map of scar tissue, his left arm replaced with a crude augmetic limb. He received me with undisguised suspicion. "I have worked with your kind before," he said during our first briefing. "I know your capabilities and your limitations. You will follow my orders exactly. You will not use your abilities without explicit authorization. You will remain under guard at all times." He leaned forward, his augmetic hand scratching at the surface of his desk. "The men already think this assignment is cursed. A warp storm delayed our arrival. Supply lines have been compromised. Enemy resistance is stronger than intelligence suggested. Morale is low. Having a witch in their midst will not improve matters. Keep your head down, do your job, and try not to get anyone killed, including yourself." My quarters were a converted storage compartment, barely large enough for a cot and a small shrine to the Emperor. 2 guards were posted outside at all times, as much to protect me from the superstitious hatred of the regiment as to protect them from any potential psychic mishap. I spent the first 3 days in isolation, studying tactical data and intelligence reports, trying to form a mental map of the conflict zone. The uprising on Calibrax had begun 6 months earlier, following the discovery of ancient artifacts in one of the deeper mining shafts. What had started as isolated incidents of madness and violence had escalated into full-scale rebellion, with nearly half the planet's population now in open revolt against Imperial authority. The reports were clinical in their description of atrocities committed by the rebels: ritual sacrifices, flesh crafting, mass orgies of violence that left entire hab blocks decorated with entrails. But between the lines, I could read the fear. This was not a mere political uprising. This was something far worse: chaos worship. On the 4th day, I was summoned to the command center for my first assignment. Captain Lorik stood before a hololithic display of a mining complex designated Epsilon 9, surrounded by his senior officers. None of them would meet my eyes as I entered. "Psyker," Lorik said without preamble, "we are planning an assault on this facility. It has been identified as a center of rebel activity, possibly their command node for this region. Before we commit forces, I want to know what we are walking into." I understood what he was asking. Battlefield divination. A psychic reconnaissance that would reveal enemy numbers, positions, and possibly intentions. "I will need a focus object," I said. "Something connected to the target location or the individuals within it." Lorik nodded to one of his aides, who brought forward a metal box. Inside was a chunk of ore, unremarkable except for the faint symbols etched into its surface. "This was recovered from a rebel courier captured 3 days ago," Lorik explained. "It came from the Epsilon 9 complex." I took the ore, careful not to touch the symbols directly. Even through my gloves, I could feel a subtle wrongness emanating from the stone. It was not overtly warp-tainted, not yet, but it had been in proximity to things that were. "I will need privacy," I said, "and guards with null rods standing by." Lorik frowned. "Is that standard procedure?" "It is a precaution," I replied. "What I am about to attempt carries certain risks." His expression darkened. "What kind of risks?" I could have lied, could have downplayed the danger, but that would have done neither of us any service. "In opening my mind to see this place, I create a channel," I explained. "Information flows from there to here, but channels can be traversed in both directions. If there are warp entities present, or individuals with psychic abilities of their own, they may become aware of my presence. They may attempt to follow the connection back to its source." Lorik stared at me for a long moment. Then he turned to his officers. "Clear the room except for essential personnel. Post 2 guards with null rods at each entrance, and someone find me a Sister of Silence if there is one, within 100 kilometers of this position." The preparations took an hour. When they were complete, I sat alone in the center of the command center, surrounded by wards hastily painted on the floor in blessed oils. The ore sample was placed on a small table before me. 4 guards with null rods stood at the cardinal points of the room, their faces grim beneath their helmets. Captain Lorik and a single Vox operator remained, standing well back from the circle. I removed my null collar, feeling the immediate rush as my psychic sense expanded outward. The constant voices at the edges of perception grew louder, more insistent, but I focused on my training, building the mental barriers that would keep them at bay. Then I placed my hands on the ore sample and opened my mind's eye. The connection formed immediately, stronger than I had anticipated. I was no longer in the command center. I was rushing through darkness, pulled along a tunnel of shifting energies toward a destination that grew clearer with each passing moment. Epsilon 9 appeared before me, but not as it would appear to normal eyes. I saw it as a nexus of energies, a tangled knot in the fabric of reality where warp and materium bled into one another. The mining complex was a wound in the world, and through that wound, things were emerging. I focused, trying to see details that would be tactically useful. Numbers, positions, weapons, what I saw froze my soul. The complex was indeed occupied by rebel forces, hundreds of them, but they were no longer entirely human. Their bodies were changing, flesh melding with metal, extra limbs sprouting from torsos, faces stretching and reshaping into bestial parodies of their former selves. They moved with a horrible synchronicity, like puppets controlled by a single puppeteer. At the center of the complex, in what had once been the main extraction chamber, they had erected a structure that defied comprehension. It was a tower, a spire, a monument built from the fused bodies of still living victims. It pulsed with a sickly light that hurt to look upon, and at its apex, something was taking shape, something vast, something hungry. I tried to pull back, to break the connection, but it was too late. I had been noticed. A presence turned its attention toward me, vast and ancient and utterly malevolent. It reached through the connection I had established, not physically but psychically, extending tendrils of pure malice that sought to entangle my mind, to drag it back through the link to the tower of flesh. I fought, throwing up every mental barrier I had been taught, reciting the litanies of protection on both the psychic and physical planes. I could hear myself screaming in the command center, could distantly feel hands holding me down as my body convulsed. The presence laughed, a sound that existed only in my mind, but that nonetheless seemed to shake the foundations of reality. It spoke, not in words but in concepts that burned themselves into my consciousness. See you, know you, have you, will have you. I felt my defenses crumbling, felt my sense of self beginning to dissolve under the assault. This was how it happened, I realized. This was how possession began. Not with dramatic confrontation, but with slow, inexorable erosion of the boundaries between self and other, until there was no clear line where the psyche ended and the entity began. In desperation, I reached for the null rods I knew were nearby in the physical world. I could not see them with my mind's eye, could not touch them directly, but I knew where they were. I gathered every ounce of my remaining will and shoved my consciousness toward them, toward the blessed emptiness they created in the warp. The contact was like a power blade through the brain. All psychic sense vanished instantly, the connection severed. I was slammed back into my physical body with such force that I bit through my tongue, filling my mouth with blood. I came back to awareness slowly, finding myself on the floor of the command center, restrained by two of the guards, while a medicae administered some kind of injection. Captain Lorick stood over me, his bolt pistol drawn and aimed at my head. "Status report," he demanded. "Are you in control, Psyche?" I tried to speak, but my mouth was filled with blood. I spat it onto the floor and nodded weakly. "Confirm verbally," he insisted, the pistol never wavering. "I am in control," I managed to say, the words slurred by my injured tongue. "The connection is broken. I am myself." He did not lower the pistol immediately. His eyes studied my face, looking for any sign of the telltale indicators of possession. The medicae ran an auspex over my body, checking for the physiological markers of warp contamination. "Readings are within acceptable parameters," the medicae reported. "Elevated stress indicators, but no sign of corruption." Only then did Lorick holster his weapon. He offered me no apology for the precaution. None was expected or needed. "What did you see?" he asked, helping me to a sitting position. I told him everything: the transformed rebels, the tower of flesh, the entity taking shape, the psychic attack. His face grew grimmer with each detail. When I had finished, he turned to the Vox operator. "Send an emergency transmission to Fleet Command. Request immediate orbital bombardment of the Epsilon 9 complex and surrounding 10-kilometer radius. Authentication code Loric Epsilon Delta 79. The Vox operator paled. "Sir, that area includes several loyal settlements." "I am aware, Lieutenant. Send the transmission." As the officer hurried to obey, Loric turned back to me. "Can you stand?" With his help, I managed to get to my feet, though my legs trembled beneath me. The psychic backlash had left me physically drained, as if I had run for days without rest. "What happens now?" I asked. "We evacuate to minimum safe distance and wait for the Emperor's mercy to rain from the sky," he said grimly, "and pray to the throne that it will be enough." The evacuation order went out immediately. All Imperial forces within 20 kilometers of Epsilon 9 were to withdraw along designated routes, creating a cordon sanitaire around the contaminated zone. Civilian evacuations were conducted where possible, but given the limited time and transport resources, priority was given to those deemed most valuable to the war effort. I spent the evacuation in a state of semi-consciousness, alternating between periods of lucidity and episodes of what the Medicae called psychic aftershock. During these episodes, I would lose awareness of my surroundings, trapped instead in fragments of the vision I had experienced. More than once I woke to find myself restrained, having apparently tried to claw out my own eyes during one of these fugue states. The bombardment began 18 hours after my divination. From our position at the forward command post, now relocated to a ridge 30 kilometers from the target zone, we could see the distant flashes as lance strikes hit the surface. The ground shook beneath our feet. The sky turned red with dust and fire. It continued for 3 hours. When it was done, where Epsilon 9 had stood was now a crater of molten rock 12 kilometers across. "Nothing could have survived that," one of the junior officers said, lowering his magnoculars. "The Emperor protects." But I knew better. I could still feel it, diminished but not destroyed. The entity in the tower. It had gone dormant, buried deep beneath the planetary crust, but it was still there, waiting, growing. I said nothing. What would have been the point? The Imperium had deployed its most readily available solution. Short of ordering exterminators for the entire planet, there was little more that could be done. 3 days later, I was cleared by the Medicae for return to duty. Captain Loric called me to his new command center, a prefabricated structure that smelled of promethium and recirculated air. "The destruction of Epsilon 9 has bought us time," he said without preamble. "But the rebellion continues. We have identified 3 more facilities that show signs of similar corruption. Fleet Command has authorized limited orbital strikes, but they are concerned about destroying too much of the planet's mining infrastructure. It is, after all, the reason the Imperium values this world." He spread a map on the table between us, indicating the locations in question. "We will be conducting ground assaults on these positions, preceded by heavy bombardment from our artillery units. Your role will be to provide tactical divination during the approach and to use your offensive capabilities once we are engaged." I stared at him in disbelief. "With respect, Captain, did you not see what happened during my last attempt at divination? The risk of corruption is extreme." Loric's face hardened. "The risk is noted and deemed acceptable given the strategic importance of these targets. You will be provided with additional safeguards. A Sister of Silence has been assigned to our unit specifically to monitor your activities." As if on cue, the door to the command center opened, admitting a tall woman in the distinctive armor of the Silent Sisterhood. Her head was shaved, her features severe. Around her neck hung the symbol of her order, a representation of a broken infinity loop. The sister did not speak. She could not. All Sisters of Silence were nulls, individuals born without a presence in the warp, their very existence a void that disrupted psychic energies. More than that, they underwent a ritual removal of their tongues upon induction into the order, a sacrifice that symbolized their rejection of all corruption. Standing near her was physically painful for me, my psychic sense recoiling from the emptiness she projected. It was like standing next to a hole in reality. "Sister Agatha will accompany you at all times during operations," Lorik said. "She has the authority to terminate you immediately if she detects any sign of warp contamination. Consider her presence both your protection and your executioner." I bowed my head in acknowledgement, knowing there was no point in further protest. I was a tool of the Imperium, to be used until I broke. "The first assault begins at dawn tomorrow," Lorik continued. "Get whatever rest you can. You will need your strength." Dawn on Calibrax was a muted affair, the sun barely visible through the perpetual haze of industrial pollution and dust thrown up by the ongoing conflict. I stood with Bravo Company at the designated assembly point, a rocky outcropping that provided some cover from enemy observation. Sister Agatha stood precisely 3 meters behind me, close enough to reach me quickly if necessary, far enough that her null aura did not completely incapacitate my psychic abilities. The target was a processing facility designated Gamma 12, located in a valley 2 kilometers ahead. Intelligence suggested it had been converted into a stronghold by rebel forces, with reinforced positions and heavy weapons emplacements protecting its approaches. Captain Lorik gave the order, and our artillery opened up, sending shells arcing toward the facility. The impacts shook the ground, sending clouds of debris skyward. After 5 minutes of sustained fire, he signaled for the barrage to cease. "Initial assessment," he demanded, turning to me. This would be a limited divination, a quick look rather than the deep probe I had attempted at Epsilon 9. Less informative, but also less dangerous. I closed my eyes, reaching out with my mind, skimming the surface of reality around the target. What I sensed was confusion, pain, anger, but nothing overtly warp-tainted. The defenders were still human, or at least had not yet transformed beyond recognition. Their numbers were reduced by the barrage, but still substantial. They were regrouping, moving to secondary positions, preparing for the ground assault they knew would follow. "Approximately 200 defenders," I reported, "mostly concentrated in the western and northern sections of the facility. Heavy weapons positioned at these coordinates." I indicated points on Lorik's tactical display. No sign of warp entities or major corruption, but there is something at the center of the complex that I cannot see clearly. A blind spot. Lorik frowned. "Deliberate concealment?" "Possible," I admitted. "Or simply the limitations of a surface reading. To see more, I would need to probe deeper." He considered this, then shook his head. "Not worth the risk at this stage. We proceed with the assault as planned. You will accompany the third wave, under the protection of Squad Epsilon. You are authorized to use offensive psychic abilities as necessary to support our advance, but only on my direct order." The assault began with a second, shorter artillery barrage, followed by the advance of our first wave, 50 guardsmen moving forward in standard dispersed formation. They made it halfway to the facility before the rebel forces opened fire. Las beams and solid projectiles cut through the morning haze, dropping a dozen men in the first volley. The remaining guardsmen took what cover they could find, returning fire while the second wave moved up to support them. Slowly, methodically, they began to advance again, pushing through withering fire toward the outer perimeter of the facility. I watched from my position with the third wave, feeling the fear and determination of our forces, the rage and desperation of the defenders. My handler, a grim-faced sergeant named Thule, kept his lasgun trained in my general direction at all times, ready to execute me at the first sign of corruption or disobedience. "Captain Lorik orders you forward," a Vox operator informed us after 15 minutes of bloody exchange. "Third wave is to advance and provide support at the eastern entrance." Sergeant Toole nodded curtly. "You heard the man. Move out." "Which? Stay in the middle of the formation. Sister, watch him closely." We advanced down the slope toward the facility, moving from cover to cover as las fire stitched the ground around us. 3 men died in the first minute, their bodies falling beside me, faces frozen in expressions of surprise or fear. I had seen death before, had caused it during my training, but never like this. Never in such chaotic abundance. The air was thick with the smell of blood and cooked flesh and fear sweat. The noise was overwhelming, a constant din of weapons fire, explosions, screams, and shouted orders. We reached the eastern entrance, a massive cargo door now half destroyed by artillery fire. The first and second waves had secured a perimeter around it, but were pinned down by heavy fire from defensive positions inside. "Psyker," called Captain Lorick, who had moved up with the second wave. "This is where you earn your rations. Clear that entrance." I understood what he was asking. This was why I had been brought here. Not for divination, not for subtle manipulation of energies, but as a weapon of brute force. I removed my null collar, feeling the immediate expansion of my senses. The voices at the edge of perception grew louder, but I pushed them aside, focusing on the task at hand. Sister Agatha moved closer, her null aura creating a zone of psychic deadness behind me. It was intentional, a tactic we had discussed. I would project forward, while she ensured nothing could approach from behind. I gathered my power, feeling it build within me like a physical pressure. The discipline known as pyromancy came most naturally to me, the ability to convert psychic energy directly into thermal energy. I focused on the defensive positions visible just inside the cargo door, reaching out with my mind to touch the air around them. "Ignis anima," I whispered, the ritual words helping to focus my intent. The effect was immediate and devastating. The air around the rebel gun emplacements superheated instantly, expanding into a fireball that engulfed everything within a 10-meter radius. Screams cut short as flesh vaporized. Metal glowed red, then white, then ran like water. When the flames cleared, there was nothing left but charred ruins and smoldering remains. The Imperial Guardsmen stared at me with a mixture of awe and revulsion. Even Captain Lorick seemed momentarily taken aback by the display of destructive power. "Advance," he ordered after a moment of silence. "Secure the interior." We pushed forward into the facility, encountering sporadic resistance that was quickly eliminated by combined las fire or, when positions were particularly well defended, by my psychic abilities. Each use of power left me more drained, more vulnerable to the whispers that grew steadily more insistent. As we approached the center of the complex, my unease grew. The blind spot I had detected earlier was becoming more pronounced, a void in my psychic perceptions that seemed to absorb light and sound. "Captain," I warned, "there is something ahead, something shielded from psychic detection." Lorick signaled for the advance to halt. He deployed his forces in defensive positions around the large central chamber that was our final objective. "Can you determine its nature?" he asked. I shook my head. "Not without direct line of sight. Whatever it is actively concealing itself from psychic detection. That suggests either technology specifically designed for that purpose, or a presence with its own significant psychic capabilities." Lorick considered this information. "We proceed with caution. Breaching teams, prepare to enter on my mark." The breaching teams moved into position around the sealed doors of the central chamber. They placed melter charges at strategic points, ready to cut through the reinforced metal. "Detonate," Lorick ordered. The charges exploded with focused heat rather than concussive force, turning sections of the door molten orange. Armored, guardsmen kicked through the weakened metal, rushing into the chamber beyond with weapons raised. They made it 3 steps before they began to die. I could not see what killed them. Neither, apparently, could they. They simply began to fall, their bodies contorting, blood pouring from their eyes and mouths as they screamed in frequencies that human throats should not be able to produce. "Fall back," Lorick shouted. "All units fall back and secure the perimeter." As the surviving guardsmen retreated, I caught my first glimpse of the chamber beyond the doors. At its center stood a device that defied simple description. It appeared to be a pillar of black metal, covered in symbols that hurt the eyes to look upon. Around it, arranged in concentric circles, were the bodies of what I assumed had been the facility's original workers, now fused to the floor and to each other in a grotesque display of fleshcraft. They were still alive, still conscious. Their eyes tracked our movements, pleading silently for release that would not come. Standing before the pillar was a single figure in the robes of a mining guild administrator. He appeared entirely human, entirely normal, except for his eyes, which reflected the light like burnished copper. "You should not have come here," he said, his voice carrying easily across the distance. "This place is not for you. Not yet." Captain Lorick raised his last pistol and fired without hesitation. The beam struck the administrator directly in the chest, burning a hole through his robes and the flesh beneath. He did not fall, did not even flinch. He looked down at the wound, which was already closing, the flesh knitting together before our eyes. "Rude," he said mildly. "I was merely making conversation." Then his gaze fell on me, standing behind the protective screen of guardsmen. His copper eyes widened slightly. "Ah," he said, "one of the Imperium's tame witches. How fascinating. Tell me, do they treat you well? Do they make you feel valued? Or do they keep you chained and collared like the dangerous animal they believe you to be?" I did not respond. Could not respond. His voice seemed to bypass my ears entirely, resonating directly within my skull. With each word, I felt something scratching at the edges of my mind, seeking entrance. The administrator smiled, as if he could sense my discomfort. "They fear you, you know," he continued. "As well they should. You are so much more than they are, so much more than they could ever be. You touch the warp directly, channel its energies through your fragile mortal form. You are a bridge between realms, a gateway, a potential god." His words found purchase in the darkest corners of my thoughts, in the resentment I had buried beneath layers of conditioning and prayer. The anger at being taken from my home, the pain of the endless training, the fear of what awaited me when my usefulness ended. I felt Sister Agatha move closer behind me, her null aura intensifying. The contact was painful, like ice against fevered skin, but it cleared my thoughts. I focused on the litanies of protection, mentally reciting the familiar words. The administrator frowned, noticing the change in my demeanor. "Ah, I see. You have one of the soulless ones with you. How crude. But effective, I grant you." He turned his attention back to Captain Lorick. "You have two choices, Captain. Leave now, and I will allow your forces to withdraw without further bloodshed. Stay, and none of you will leave this place as you entered it. Some will not leave at all." Lorick's response was another shot from his last pistol, this time aimed at the administrator's head. The beam passed through him without effect, as if he were merely a hololithic projection. "I suspected as much," the administrator sighed. "Violence is ever the first resort of the Imperial mind. Very well." He raised his hands, and the fused bodies surrounding the pillar began to move, tearing themselves free from the floor with wet, ripping sounds. They staggered upright, their forms twisted and misshapen, and began to advance toward the doorway where we stood. "Kill them," Lorick ordered. "Kill them all." The guardsmen opened fire, last beams cutting through the advancing horrors. Body parts were severed, flesh vaporized, but still they came. For every one that fell, two more tore themselves free from the grisly display. "Psyker," Lorick shouted over the din of weapons fire, "destroy that pillar." I gathered my power once more, focusing it into a lance of pure thermal energy directed at the black metal structure. The air between us shimmered with heat as I released the psychic blast. It struck the pillar and dissipated harmlessly, the energy absorbed without visible effect. The administrator laughed. "Did you truly think it would be that simple?" he asked. "This device was old when your species still huddled in caves. It has survived the death of stars. Your parlor tricks cannot harm it." More of the fused bodies were freeing themselves, their numbers growing faster than our forces could put them down. They began to slip past our defensive line, engaging the guardsmen in close combat where their twisted forms and unnatural strength gave them a terrible advantage. I switched tactics, directing my psychic energy not at the pillar but at the approaching horrors. Flames engulfed them, reducing dozens to ash in seconds. But there were hundreds more, and my strength was fading with each exertion. "We need to withdraw," I shouted to Lorik, who was firing steadily into the advancing horde. "We cannot win this fight." For a moment, I thought he would ignore me, would order us to hold position until the bitter end. Then he gave a curt nod. "Tactical withdrawal," he ordered over the Vox. "All units fall back to secondary positions, covering fire by squads." We began to pull back, maintaining discipline despite the horrors pressing in from all sides. The withdrawal was orderly at first, then increasingly desperate as more of the twisted creatures broke through our thinning lines. I continued to use my abilities to hold them back, creating walls of flame that bought precious seconds for our forces to retreat. But each use of power left me weaker, more vulnerable to the whispers that had grown to a constant roar at the edges of my consciousness. "Join us, Beckham, liberation, power, freedom, and suffering." The voices were no longer content to remain at the periphery. They pushed inward, seeking purchase in my thoughts, offering promises, painting visions of a world where I was not a slave but a master, where my gifts were celebrated rather than feared. I felt my control slipping, the careful barriers I had maintained beginning to crack under the strain. The flames I conjured began to change color, shifting from natural orange to an otherworldly green that left strange afterimages on the retina. Sister Agatha noticed immediately. She moved closer, her null aura intensifying to painful levels. The voices receded, driven back by her presence, but my powers receded with them. The wall of flame flickered and died. The twisted horrors surged forward through the gap. 3 guardsmen died in as many seconds, torn apart by clawed hands and elongated jaws. "Fall back," Lorik ordered. "Emergency withdrawal. All units, make for the extraction point." What had been an organized retreat became a headlong flight. We ran through the corridors of the facility, the sounds of pursuit close behind us. I stumbled, my strength nearly gone, and would have fallen if not for Sister Agatha's hand gripping my arm. Her touch was painful, the null aura like acid against my psychic sense, but it kept me moving, kept me anchored in reality. We emerged from the facility into the harsh daylight of Calibrax. Imperial forces were scattered across the open ground, running for the relative safety of our original positions on the ridge. Many did not make it, cut down by weapons fire from rebel forces who had somehow circled around to flank us. Through it all, I could hear the administrator's voice, still speaking directly into my mind, despite the increasing distance. "You cannot run from what you are," he said, his tone almost gentle. "The power will find you wherever you go. It will offer itself to you again and again, until one day, in a moment of weakness or desperation, you will accept. And on that day, you will be free." I knew he spoke the truth. It was the fate of all sanctioned psychers, the sword hanging over our heads from the moment our abilities manifested. Not if, but when. We reached the ridge and regrouped, counting our losses. Of the 300 guardsmen who had begun the assault, fewer than 100 had returned. Captain Lorik was among them, his face a mask of controlled fury as he conferred with his remaining officers. "Orbital strike," I heard him say. "Request immediate orbital bombardment of the target area." The same solution as before, burn it from orbit and pray that would be enough. But I knew it would not be. Whatever had been contained in that black pillar, whatever was now loose upon Calibrax, could not be so easily destroyed. It would go dormant again, hide itself deep beneath the surface, continue its slow corruption of the world and its people, and one day it would emerge again, stronger than before. The bombardment came an hour later, a series of lance strikes that turned the processing facility and several square kilometers around it into a lake of molten rock. We watched from our position on the ridge, the heat of the blast washing over us even at this distance. When it was done, Captain Lorik approached me where I sat, exhausted, under the watchful eyes of Sister Agatha. "Your assessment," he said without preamble. I considered lying, telling him what he wanted to hear, that the threat had been eliminated, that our sacrifice had meaning, that the Emperor's will had prevailed, but I could not. Perhaps it was fatigue that loosened my tongue, or perhaps some faint spark of defiance that all the conditioning had failed to extinguish. "It is still there," I said, "buried, dormant, but not destroyed. It will return." Lorik's face tightened. "You are certain?" "Yes." He was silent for a long moment, weighing options, calculating costs and benefits with the cold precision of an Imperial officer. "I will include your assessment in my report to command," he said finally. "The decision for further action will be theirs." We both knew what that meant. The Imperium might order exterminatus, the ultimate sanction that would render the entire planet lifeless. Or, more likely, given Calibrax's strategic importance as a mining world, they would simply quarantine the affected areas, post guards, and continue to extract resources from the remaining sectors, until the corruption spread too far to contain, until the next uprising, until the next wave of horror. The cycle would continue, as it had on countless worlds across the galaxy. The Imperium would fight, contain, suppress, but never truly eliminate the threat, because to do so would require resources it could not spare, attention it could not afford to divert from 1,000 other equally desperate conflicts. In the grim darkness of the far future, there was only war, endless, futile, necessary. 3 days later, I was reassigned. Captain Lorik received orders to detach me to a newly formed Imperial task force being assembled to deal with a separate uprising on the neighboring world of Hesperia Prime. The Sister of Silence would accompany me, my permanent shadow and executioner. "You performed adequately," Lorik told me as I prepared to board the shuttle that would take me to the orbiting troopship. "For a Psyker." It was as close to praise as I was likely to receive from an Imperial officer. "The men called you the Fire Witch," he added. "They say you saved many lives with your abilities." I did not know how to respond to this information. I had been trained to view myself as a weapon, a tool, never as a protector or savior. The concept was foreign, almost heretical. "I did as I was commanded," I said finally, "as I was created to do." Lorik nodded, accepting this answer. "We all serve in our assigned roles. The Emperor protects." "The Emperor protects," I echoed automatically. As I boarded the shuttle, I wondered if I truly believed those words anymore. Did the Emperor protect? Or did he merely watch from his golden throne as countless billions suffered and died in his name, powerless to intervene, perhaps even indifferent to their fate? Such thoughts were dangerous, bordering on heresy. I pushed them aside, focusing instead on the immediate future. A new assignment, new battles, new horrors to face with my dwindling strength and increasingly fragile control. How long until I slipped? How long until the voices broke through my defenses? How long until Sister Agatha's blade separated my head from my shoulders, granting the final mercy of oblivion? I did not know, could not know. All I could do was continue to serve, continue to fight, continue to resist the temptations that grew stronger with each passing day. The shuttle lifted off, carrying me away from Calibrax and the buried horror that still whispered in my dreams. Ahead lay Hesperia Prime and whatever awaited me there. Behind me, Sister Agatha sat in silence, her null aura a constant reminder of what I was and what I might become. Her hand never strayed far from her sword. I closed my eyes and recited the litany of control, trying to find comfort in its familiar words. I am the vessel, not the content. I am the channel, not the power. I am the servant, never the master. The voices laughed. My new assignment proved even more harrowing than the last. Hesperia Prime was an agricultural world, its vast plains covered in genetically modified crop strains designed to grow in its mineral-rich but oxygen-poor soil. The rebellion there had begun in the outlying farming communities, spreading inward toward the administrative centers with alarming speed. Unlike on Calibrax, Where the corruption had been concentrated in specific locations, on Hesperia it was diffuse, spread across thousands of square kilometers of farmland. The rebels moved in small groups, striking at Imperial outposts and supply lines before melting back into the endless fields of gray-green crops. I was attached to a mobile response force, a company of mechanized infantry tasked with pursuing and eliminating these elusive rebel bands. We traveled in a convoy of chimera transports, heavily armed but vulnerable to the guerrilla tactics employed by our enemies. My role was primarily defensive, using divination to detect ambushes before we rode into them, and telekinetic shields to protect our vehicles from the crude but effective explosives the rebels placed along our routes. Offensive actions were rare, reserved for those occasions when we actually managed to corner a significant rebel force. It was exhausting work. Constant vigilance drained my mental reserves, leaving me perpetually on the edge of collapse. The voices grew ever louder, the temptation to yield to their promises increasingly difficult to resist. Only Sister Agatha's presence kept me anchored, her null aura a painful but necessary tether to reality. Without her, I have no doubt I would have fallen within days. The commander of our force was Major Havelock, a veteran of the Catachan regiments who had been seconded to Hesperia after distinguishing himself in the jungle wars of his homeworld. He was a practical man, lacking the rigid adherence to protocol that characterized so many Imperial officers. He treated me not as a weapon or a necessary evil, but as a specialized tool with specific applications and limitations. "You tell me when you need rest, Witch," he said during our first briefing. "I need you functional, burn out, and you are useless to me, worse than useless, a liability." It was a small kindness, but in the Imperium of man, small kindnesses were often all one could hope for. We spent 3 weeks tracking a particularly effective rebel band through the northern agricultural districts. They had destroyed 2 Imperial supply convoys and assassinated a visiting Adeptus Administratum official before disappearing into the endless fields. Each day brought us closer, divination revealing traces of their passage, direction of travel, estimated strength. But they were clever, changing course frequently, doubling back, splitting into smaller groups, only to reunite days later at pre-arranged coordinates. And there was something else, something that troubled me more with each passing day. The rebels we pursued were changing, not physically, not yet, but psychically. When I touched their trail with my mind, I could sense a growing resonance, a unity of purpose that went beyond mere military discipline or ideological fervor. They were becoming a single entity, their individual minds linking into a collective consciousness that amplified their abilities and coordinated their actions with inhuman precision. I reported this to Major Havelock, who received the information with characteristic pragmatism. "Can you use it against them?" he asked. "If they are linked, can you attack one to harm all?" I considered the question. Potentially, but it would require direct contact, either visual or physical. And it would be exceptionally dangerous. For them, or for you? Both, I admitted. Such a connection runs both ways. In attempting to attack their collective mind, I would expose myself to their influence. Havelock nodded, understanding the implications. A last resort, then. We continue the pursuit as planned. On the 23rd day of the hunt, we finally cornered our quarry. They had taken refuge in an abandoned processing facility, a massive structure of rockcrete and plasteel surrounded by silos and distribution yards. Our Auspex scans indicated approximately 50 life forms within the main building, consistent with the estimated strength of the rebel band. "Standard assault protocol," Havelock ordered. "Suppressive fire from the chimeras, infantry advance under cover. Psyker, you will remain in reserve until I call for you. Sister, keep him safe." The assault began at dawn, our heavy weapons pounding the facility's exterior, creating breaches for our infantry to exploit. The rebels returned fire with stolen Imperial weapons and improvised explosives, cutting down the first wave of guardsmen as they approached the walls. I watched from my position in the command chimera, using my abilities to provide real-time information about enemy positions and movements. What I saw troubled me deeply. The rebels were not fighting as individuals but as extensions of a single will. They did not communicate verbally or via vox. They simply knew where to be, when to fire, how to coordinate their actions for maximum effect. It was as if they were puppets controlled by a master puppeteer, and at the center of the facility, something was gathering power, a psychic presence that grew stronger with each passing minute, feeding on the fear and pain and death that surrounded it. "Major," I said urgently, "there is something else in there, something powerful. We need to withdraw." Havelock frowned, studying the tactical display that showed our forces slowly gaining ground despite heavy casualties. "We have them cornered," he said. "This ends today." "You do not understand," I insisted. "What you are fighting is not what you think. These are not rebels, not anymore. They are vessels, channels for something far worse." As if to punctuate my warning, the quality of the battle changed abruptly. The rebel fire became more precise, dropping guardsmen with single shots to the head or throat. Then the first of the true horrors emerged from the facility. It had once been human. The basic structure of its body still suggested humanity. But it had been changed, transformed into something that defied rational comprehension. Its skin had hardened into chitinous plates that deflected less fire. Its arms had elongated, ending in razor-sharp talons that could tear through flak armor with ease. Its face was a mass of sensory organs that had no place on a human body, writhing tendrils that tasted the air and probed the ground. And it was not alone. Dozens more poured from the breaches in the facility walls, charging our lines with inhuman speed and coordination. "Emperor preserve us," Havelock whispered, watching the feed from the front lines. Then, recovering his composure, "All units fall back to secondary positions. Heavy weapons prioritize the large targets." The battle degenerated into a desperate fighting retreat, our forces giving ground meter by bloody meter as the transformed rebels pushed forward. Our heavy weapons took a toll, plasma guns and melter weapons proving effective against the mutated flesh. But there were too many, and they learned too quickly, adapting their tactics to minimize exposure to our most dangerous weapons. "We need your help, Psyker," Havelock said finally, turning to me. "Whatever you can do, do it now." I nodded, removing my null collar. Sister Agatha stepped back, giving me the psychic space I needed to work while remaining close enough to intervene if necessary. I reached out with my mind, bypassing the transformed foot soldiers to touch the presence at the center of the facility. What I found there froze my soul. It was vast, ancient, a consciousness that had existed for millennia, flitting from world to world, host to host, always seeking, always hungry. It had no name that could be expressed in human language, no form that could be perceived by human senses. It was pure will, pure hunger, pure malevolence, and it was aware of me. I felt it turn its attention toward my mind, felt it reach out across the psychic link I had established. Not in attack, not at first, but in recognition, in welcome. Brother Sis Turkin. The concept crashed into my mind with the force of a physical blow. It saw me not as an enemy but as a potential vessel, a superior host to the half-transformed humans it currently inhabited. I recoiled, throwing up every psychic barrier I had been taught, reciting the litanies of protection on both the mental and physical planes. But it was like trying to hold back an ocean with a paper screen. The entity smashed through my defenses with contemptuous ease, flooding my mind with images and sensations that defied description. I saw worlds burn. I saw civilizations rise and fall. I saw the birth and death of stars, and through it all, I saw the entity, moving from host to host, world to world, feeding, growing, spreading its influence across time and space. Then it showed me what it offered. Power beyond mortal comprehension, knowledge of secrets hidden since the birth of the universe, freedom from the shackles the Imperium had placed upon me, freedom from fear, from pain, from the inescapable doom that awaited all sanctioned psychers. All I had to do was yield, accept it into myself, become one with it, as the rebels had done. Become more than human, more than psyche, become a god. For a moment, a terrible moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, I considered it. The temptation was immense, a siren song that resonated with every frustration, every resentment, every fear I had ever felt. Why not? Why not take what was offered? Why continue to serve an Imperium that viewed me as nothing more than a disposable weapon? Why fight for a humanity that feared and hated me for the abilities I had never asked to possess? In that moment of weakness, that fraction of a second where my resolve faltered, the entity surged forward, pouring its essence through the psychic link into my mind, my soul, my very being. And then, pain. Absolute, all-consuming pain as Sister Agatha's null aura enveloped me, completely. She had seen my distress, had recognized the signs of imminent possession, and had closed the distance between us, pressing her null stone directly against my temple. The pain was indescribable. It was as if every nerve in my body had been set alight, every synapse firing simultaneously in a cascade of agony that transcended physical sensation. The psychic link shattered, the entity's essence recoiling from the null void that Sister Agatha projected. I collapsed, blood pouring from my eyes, ears, nose, and mouth. My body convulsed, muscles spasming beyond my control. Through a haze of pain, I heard Havelock shouting for a medicae, felt hands restraining me to prevent me from injuring myself further. Then, darkness. I awoke in a field hospital, my body restrained, a null collar set to maximum dampening locked around my throat. Sister Agatha stood at the foot of my bed, her expression unreadable as always, but her hand resting on the hilt of her sword. Major Havelock sat beside the bed, his uniform stained with blood and soot, his face haggard with exhaustion. "You live," he said when he saw I was conscious. "The medicae thought you would not." I tried to speak, but my throat was too dry, my vocal cords damaged by screaming I did not remember. Havelock offered me water from a canteen, helping me drink despite my restraints. "What happened?" I managed to ask after the blessed moisture had soothed my ravaged throat. "We lost," Havelock said simply. "After you collapsed, the enemy broke through our lines. We were forced to withdraw completely. 3/4 of the company dead or missing." He leaned forward, his eyes hard. "I need to know what happened to you. What did you see? What did you find in that facility?" I told him, as completely and honestly as I could, about the entity, its age, its nature, its offers, about my moment of weakness, my near fall. When I had finished, Havelock was silent for a long time, processing the implications of what I had or revealed. "This is beyond a mere rebellion," he said finally. "Beyond even the usual heresy, this is a full-scale demonic incursion." The word hung in the air between us. Daemon. Not simply a warp entity, not merely a Xenos presence, but one of the true denizens of the Immaterium, the nightmare creatures that served the ruinous powers. "We need to report this directly to Sector Command," Havelock continued. "Request immediate reinforcement. Inquisitorial intervention." The mention of the Inquisition sent a chill through me. The relationship between the Inquisition and sanctioned psychers was complicated at best. They valued our abilities but distrusted us inherently, and a psyker who had nearly fallen to demonic possession would be viewed with extreme suspicion. "Will they execute me?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Havelock met my gaze directly. "Most likely. You came very close to becoming a gateway for a warp entity of significant power. From the Inquisition's perspective, the risk of allowing you to live would outweigh any potential future utility." He hesitated, then added, "If I were you, I would not be present when the inquisitorial representatives arrive." I stared at him in shock. Was he suggesting what I thought he was? "That would be desertion," I said carefully. "Heresy." Havelock shrugged. "It would be, and normally, I would be the first to execute a deserter. But these are not normal circumstances. You have served well. You resisted when many would have yielded. and I believe your abilities may yet be needed in the fight to come." He stood, avoiding Sister Agatha's gaze. "I am due to make a full report to command in 1 hour. During that time, this area will be minimally staffed. The Medicae has been ordered to attend to more critical cases in the main ward. The restraints you wear are standard issue. The key code is 7734. With that, he turned and left, leaving me alone with Sister Agatha. I looked at her, trying to read some hint of her intentions in her impassive face. Would she allow this? Or would her duty compel her to prevent my escape, to ensure I faced the judgment of the Inquisition? For a long moment, she remained motionless. Then, slowly, deliberately, she removed the null stone from around her neck and placed it on the bed beside me. Without it, her null aura was significantly reduced, enough that I could potentially use my abilities despite the collar. She met my eyes one last time, inclined her head in the slightest of nods, then turned and walked away, leaving me alone in the small Medicae tent. I did not hesitate. Using the key code Havelock had provided, I released my restraints. The null collar was more problematic, requiring a different code that I did not possess. But with Sister Agatha's null stone now in my possession, I was able to use a small, focused burst of telekinetic energy to short out its locking mechanism. The collar fell away, and for the first time in months, my psychic sense expanded fully, unimpeded by either the collar or Sister Agatha's presence. The voices at the edge of perception swelled to a cacophony, but I forced them back, focusing on the immediate task of escape. I made my way out of the field hospital, using minor telepathic suggestions to divert the attention of the few staff members I encountered. Outside, the Imperial camp was in disarray, the remnants of several shattered companies attempting to reorganize after the disastrous engagement. I appropriated the uniform of a dead guardsman, using it to conceal my distinctive psycho robes. With my head down and my mind carefully shielded to avoid psychic detection, I made my way to the perimeter and slipped past the sentries during a shift change. Once beyond the camp, I began the long journey away from the war zone, away from the Imperium that had used me and would now discard me, away from the daemon that had nearly claimed my soul. I had no destination in mind, no plan beyond immediate survival. I was a rogue psyker now, a dangerous fugitive who would be shot on sight by any loyal Imperial citizen. My future, if I had one, would be spent in hiding, forever looking over my shoulder for the inquisitorial agents who would inevitably be dispatched to hunt me down. But I was free. For the first time since those red hooded figures had taken me from my home, I was free to choose my own path, to make my own decisions, to live or die by my own will rather than the will of the Imperium. As dawn broke over the war-torn fields of Hesperia Prime, I wondered what my future held. Freedom, yes, but at what cost? The voices would remain, perhaps grow stronger without the discipline and wards of the Scholastia, and the daemon I had encountered would not forget me. Such entities had long memories and infinite patience. It might hunt me across the stars, drawn to the psychic beacon of my untethered mind. But those were concerns for tomorrow. Today, I would simply walk, putting distance between myself and my past, hoping to find some remote corner of the Imperium where I might live quietly, anonymously, controlling my abilities through the techniques I had been taught without drawing attention to myself. I knew the odds were against me. Rogue psychers rarely survived long. Either the Imperium found them, or the predators of the warp did, or their own powers eventually consumed them, turning them into the very abominations they had been warned against becoming. Perhaps that would be my fate as well. Perhaps freedom was simply an illusion, a different kind of cage with different bars. But as I walked across the blasted fields of Hesperia Prime, the rising sun warm on my face, I felt something I had not experienced since childhood. Hope. Hope that there might be more to existence than service and sacrifice. Hope that I might find a place where my abilities were neither weapon nor curse, but simply part of who I was. Hope that I might, against all odds, forge a life of my own choosing. It was a fragile thing, that hope, as delicate as a feather balanced on the edge of a blade. But it was mine. and for now, at least, that was enough. I pause in my narrative here, though my journey continued long after that dawn on Hesperia Prime. Perhaps I will share those tales another time, if the Emperor wills it, or perhaps not. Some stories are better left untold, some truths better left unspoken. But know this: those of you who have never felt the touch of the warp upon your mind, we who bear the curse of the witch mark, are not so different from you. We fear, we hope, we dream, we suffer, we are human, despite what the Imperium would have you believe. Remember that, when next you see one of us, chained and collared, our minds and bodies bent to the Emperor's service. Remember that beneath the robes of office and the symbols of containment beats a human heart, feels a human soul, a soul that weeps for what it has lost, for what it might have been. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war, they say. Endless conflict, spanning the stars, consuming lives beyond counting. But even in that darkness, even in that endless war, there are moments of light, moments of mercy, moments of humanity. Hold fast to those moments when all else fails, for they are precious beyond measure and far too easily lost. I am Malric Thane, once a sanctioned psyker of the Imperium of Man, now a fugitive from its justice. My life has been one of bondage, pain, and constant struggle against forces that would unmake my very being. But I endure. I survive. I remain human, despite everything that has been done to me, everything I have seen, everything I have been forced to do. That is my victory, small though it may be. That is my defiance against the darkness. Whether I will maintain that victory in the days to come, I cannot say. The voices still whisper, the temptations still arise, the daemon still hunts, and the Imperium never forgets those who flee its service. But, for now, for this moment, I am Malric Thane, not Psyker Designate MX-379, not the Fire Witch, not a weapon or a tool or a resource to be expended, just a man, walking toward an uncertain future, carrying hope like a flickering candle in the endless night. The Emperor may protect, but we must save ourselves. Perhaps that is the true horror of the life of an Imperial Psyker. Not the chains, not the pain, not even the constant threat of possession or execution, but the knowledge that we stand forever alone against the darkness, burdened with power we did not ask for and cannot relinquish, forever balanced on the knife edge between salvation and damnation. With each passing year, that balance becomes harder to maintain. The voices grow louder, the temptations stronger, the barriers between mind and warp thinner. There will come a day, I know, when my strength fails, when the walls I have built crumble, when the darkness that has haunted me since childhood finally claims its prize. On that day, I hope only for a clean end, a bolt shell to the brain, a blade through the heart, the final mercy of oblivion, before I become the very thing I have fought all my life to resist. But until that day comes, I will continue to walk my chosen path. I will continue to hope, to dream, to remember what it means to be human in a universe that conspires at every turn to strip that humanity away. In the end, that is all any of us can do, Psyker or not. We endure, we survive, we hold fast to whatever light we can find in the darkness. And perhaps, if we are very fortunate, we find moments of grace amidst the horror, moments of connection, moments of peace. I have known few such moments in my life, but I treasure each one, a hoard of memories more precious than all the wealth of terror, the kindness of Major Havelock, the silent understanding of Sister Agatha, the quiet dawn on Hesperia Prime, small mercies in a merciless universe. But enough to sustain me through the long night. Ahead, enough to remind me that even in the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war, there remains the possibility of something more, something better. Something worth fighting for, worth dying for, something worth living for. I am Malric Thane, rogue psyker, enemy of the Imperium, hunted by daemons and men alike, and I am still here, still human, still free. For now that is victory enough.